Black CEO goes undercover to his dealership. The next day he fires his employees. Marcus Grant stared at the quarterly report spread across his mahogany desk, his jaw tightening with each number he reviewed. Something wasn't adding up. As the CEO and founder of Grant Luxury Motors, he built his dealership from the ground up over 15 years, turning it into the most prestigious car lot in the city. But these numbers, they made his stomach churn. 47 vehicles? He muttered to himself, running his finger down the inventory column. 47 cars that should be here but aren't. The official explanation from his managers was always the same: delayed deliveries, customer test drives that ran long, cars sent for specialized detailing. But Marcus had been in this business too long to buy those excuses. His instincts, honed from years of building this empire from nothing, screamed that something was very wrong. The rain drummed against his office windows on the 20th floor overlooking the dealership lot below. Even from this height, he could see the neat rows of luxury vehicles, Mercedes, BMWs, Audis, and his specialty, rare imported sports cars worth more than most people's houses. But were they all really there? Marcus picked up his phone and dialed his head of security, James Morrison, a gruff ex-cop who'd been with the company for 8 years. "Morrison, it's Marcus. I need a favor, and I need you to keep it between us." "What's going on, boss?" "I want to work a few night shifts as security." "Don't ask questions, just make it happen. Create a fake identity, background story, the works. I need to see what happens here when the sun goes down." There was silence on the other end. "Boss, with all due respect, why don't you just review the security footage?" Marcus had already thought of that. "Because someone with access could easily edit footage." "I need eyes on the ground, James. Real eyes." 3 days later, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing himself. Gone was the tailored suit, the expensive watch, the confident posture of a man who commanded respect in boardrooms. Instead, he saw Marcus Johnson, his middle name and his grandmother's maiden name, a 42-year-old former military man down on his luck, looking for steady work as a night security guard. He'd grown out his beard, traded his luxury car for a 15-year-old Honda Civic, and practiced speaking in a slightly different accent, dropping the polished tone he'd cultivated over years of business meetings. His story was simple: recently divorced, needed extra income, had military experience that made him perfect for security work. The transformation was so complete that when he walked into the dealership's HR department that Tuesday morning, even Sharon, the HR manager who'd worked for him for 5 years, didn't give him a second glance. "So, Mr. Johnson," Sharon said, reviewing his fabricated resume, "James Morrison recommended you highly. Says you're exactly what we need for the night shift." "Yes, ma'am. I'm a hard worker, and I need this job." Marcus was surprised at how naturally the humble tone came to him. "I've got bills to pay and nowhere else to go." Sharon nodded sympathetically. "The night shift can be lonely, but it's straightforward. You'll patrol the lot every 2 hours, check all the cars, make sure the building is secure. There's been some irregularities lately, so we need someone reliable." Irregularities. That was an interesting way to put it. "What kind of irregularities?" Marcus asked, playing the concerned potential employee. "Oh, nothing major. Just some paperwork issues, cars being moved around more than usual. Probably nothing, but Mr. Grant, our CEO, he's very particular about everything being in its place." If only you knew, Marcus thought. His first night on the job was a revelation. The dealership after hours was a completely different world. The gleaming showroom that buzzed with activity during the day became an eerie cavern of shadows and silence. The lot, usually filled with the chatter of salespeople and customers, was now a maze of expensive metal and glass reflecting the security lights. Marcus was issued a flashlight, a two-way radio, and a key card that gave him access to most areas of the building. His supervisor for the night shift was Craig Wilson, a thin man in his 50s who seemed nervous around the new hire. "So, Marcus, right? The routine is pretty simple," Craig explained as they walked through the showroom. "Every 2 hours you do a full perimeter check. Start with the indoor cars, then move to the outdoor lot. Log everything in this book: time, location, anything unusual. Marcus nodded, noting how Craig's eyes darted around nervously. Got it. What counts as unusual? Oh, broken windows, attempted break-ins, cars not where they're supposed to be. Craig paused. Though between you and me, sometimes cars get moved around for various reasons. Don't worry too much about it unless something's obviously wrong. That was the first red flag. In Marcus's dealership, cars had specific locations for specific reasons. They weren't moved around casually, especially not at night. As Craig prepared to leave, he handed Marcus a thermos of coffee and a sandwich. Gets cold out there. Oh, and Marcus? If any trucks come by, delivery trucks, transport trucks, don't worry about logging those. They're usually running behind schedule, trying to catch up on deliveries. Corporate stuff, above our pay grade. Second red flag. Every delivery to Grant Luxury Motors was meticulously scheduled and logged. There were no, behind schedule, trucks that arrived without appointments. Understood, Marcus replied, but his mind was already racing. The first few hours of his shift were routine. He walked the perimeter, checked the cars, noted their positions. Everything seemed normal until around 2 a.m. when he heard the distant rumble of a large truck engine. Marcus quickly turned off his flashlight and moved toward the sound. Through the chain-link fence that bordered the back of the lot, he could see headlights approaching. A massive car transport truck was backing up to the rear gate, a gate that was supposed to be locked and unused except for emergency exits. He crouched behind a row of cars and watched as two figures emerged from the shadows. One was carrying bolt cutters, the other had keys. Marcus couldn't see their faces clearly, but their movements were confident, practiced. This wasn't their first time. The gate swung open silently. Someone had oiled the hinges recently. The truck driver, a heavy-set man in a baseball cap, stepped down from the cab and began lowering the transport ramps. Marcus's heart pounded as he realized what he was witnessing. This wasn't a delayed delivery. This was theft, happening right under his nose, on his own property. But who were these people? How did they have keys? And most importantly, how long had this been going on? He wanted to call the police immediately, but something held him back. If he acted now, he might only catch the small fish. His business instincts told him that this operation was too smooth, too professional to be the work of a few random criminals. Someone with inside knowledge was coordinating this. As the truck prepared to leave with what appeared to be 3 luxury sedans, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of stopping them, he was going to follow them. He needed to know where they were taking his cars and who was really behind this operation. But first, he had to maintain his cover. He made his way back to the security office and filled out his patrol log as if nothing had happened. His hands were shaking slightly as he wrote, but he forced himself to stay calm. Tomorrow night, he would be ready. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus clocked out and walked to his Honda Civic, his mind buzzing with plans. The employees arriving for the day's shift waved politely at the new night security guard, having no idea they had just greeted their CEO. But Marcus Grant was patient. He'd built his business by being thorough, by understanding every detail before making his move. If someone was stealing from him, he was going to find out who, how, and why. And then, he was going to destroy them. 3 nights later, Marcus had developed a routine that would have impressed any real security guard. He arrived at exactly 11 p.m., checked in with Craig Wilson, and began his rounds with military precision. But beneath the surface, he was conducting his own investigation, one that was revealing disturbing patterns. The security logs told a fascinating story once you knew what to look for. Marcus had gained access to the digital records during his day's shifts as CEO, cross-referencing them with his nightly observations. What he found made his blood boil. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for the past 4 months there were gaps in the logged patrols. Small gaps, 15 to 20 minutes, that occurred between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Gaps that coincidentally aligned with the nights when inventory discrepancies were highest. Tonight was Thursday, and Marcus was ready. He prepared differently this time. Hidden in his security uniform were a small digital camera, a voice recorder, and a GPS tracker he'd borrowed from his personal vehicle fleet. If trucks were coming and going, he was going to document everything. At 1:45 a.m., Marcus positioned himself in the shadows behind the service bay, where he had a clear view of both the rear gate and the main lot. The November air was crisp, and his breath formed small clouds as he waited. Right on schedule, he heard the rumble. This time, it wasn't just one truck. Two massive car carriers were approaching, their running lights dimmed to barely visible levels. Marcus raised his camera and began recording as the first truck backed up to the now familiar rear gate. But tonight, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The person opening the gate wasn't some random criminal. It was David Chin, his assistant manager of logistics, a man Marcus had personally promoted just 8 months ago. "David," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected. David wasn't just an employee. Marcus had mentored him, helped him through a difficult divorce, even given him a bonus when his daughter needed surgery. The operation unfolded with military precision. David directed the drivers with hand signals while two other figures, faces still hidden in the darkness, began selecting vehicles. They weren't choosing randomly. They had a list, and they knew exactly which cars to take. Marcus watched in horror as they loaded a limited edition Porsche 911 Turbo S, the same car that was supposed to be delivered to Mrs. Patterson, one of their most loyal customers, next week. Behind it went a pristine white BMW M8, still wearing its "sold" sticker from the showroom. The most chilling part wasn't the theft itself, it was how legitimate it all looked. The drivers had proper transport documentation. David was using an official dealership tablet to log the transfers. Anyone stumbling upon this scene would assume it was routine business. But Marcus knew better. He zoomed in with his camera as David signed what appeared to be legitimate transport papers. The trucks weren't just stealing cars. They were creating a paper trail that would make the thefts nearly impossible to trace through normal channels. As the first truck prepared to leave, Marcus noticed something that made his blood freeze. The license plate was partially obscured, but he could make out enough numbers to realize he'd seen this truck before. Not here at the dealership, but in the visitor parking at his corporate headquarters downtown. The second truck began loading immediately. This time, Marcus counted carefully, 4 high-end vehicles, including a rare Aston Martin that had arrived just days before. Each car represented between $80,000 and $300,000 in value. In 20 minutes, he just watched nearly $1 million drive away into the night. But the real shock came as the operation concluded. A third person emerged from the shadows to help close the gate, and Marcus nearly gasped out loud when he recognized the silhouette. It was Jennifer Walsh, his head of inventory management, the same Jennifer who'd been providing him with the explanations for the missing vehicles. The conspiracy was bigger than he'd imagined. This wasn't opportunistic theft by a few bad employees. This was a coordinated operation involving people he trusted with the most sensitive aspects of his business. As the trucks disappeared into the night, Marcus forced himself to complete his regular patrol rounds. He logged his times carefully, maintaining his cover while his mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered. Back in the security office, he reviewed the digital logs on the computer system. Just as he suspected, tonight's activities would show no record of any unusual truck traffic. Someone with administrative access was scrubbing the digital records in real time. Marcus spent the remaining hours of his shift creating detailed notes of everything he'd witnessed, storing them in a secure app on his personal phone. He now had video evidence, but he needed more. He needed to know where those trucks were going and how extensive this network really was. As his shift ended and the sun began to rise, Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct screaming at him to call the police immediately. He was going to follow those trucks tomorrow night. But first, he had some investigation to do during his day job as CEO. Walking to his Honda Civic, Marcus felt the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. People he trusted, people whose families he knew, were systematically destroying everything he'd built. But Marcus Grant hadn't become successful by giving up when things got difficult. If they wanted to play games with his business, he was going to show them what happened when you betrayed someone who'd fought for everything he had. Tomorrow night, the real hunt would begin. Saturday night arrived with a bone-chilling rain that turned the city streets slick and treacherous. Marcus sat in his Honda Civic 3 blocks away from the dealership, engine running, wipers beating a steady rhythm against the windshield. Tonight, he wasn't just observing, he was hunting. He'd spent Friday afternoon as CEO Marcus Grant doing his own investigation. Using his executive access, he'd pulled vehicle registration records, cross-referenced shipping manifests, and discovered something that made his hands shake with rage. Over 60 vehicles had been marked as sold or transferred in the past 6 months, but the corresponding revenue never appeared in the company accounts. 60 vehicles. Nearly $8 million in missing inventory. Now, as security guard Marcus Johnson, he was about to find out where his stolen empire was hiding. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the familiar rumble of diesel engines cut through the rain. 2 transport trucks approached the rear gate, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. Marcus started his Honda and pulled onto the street, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to maintain visual contact. The loading process was quicker tonight. David Chen and his crew worked with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit team. In 18 minutes, 6 vehicles disappeared onto the trucks, including a cherry red Ferrari that Marcus remembered personally selecting at an auction in Miami. As the convoy pulled away, Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. After 15 years of building his business, he was about to discover where his life's work was being dismantled piece by piece. The trucks headed east through the industrial district, past warehouses and freight yards that Marcus had never paid attention to before. The rain made following them treacherous. He had to stay close enough to keep their taillights in sight while remaining invisible in the maze of late-night commercial traffic. 23 minutes later, the trucks turned into what appeared to be an abandoned shipping facility. Marcus drove past the entrance, noting the address, then circled back to park behind a rusted container stack about 200 yards away. What he saw through his binoculars made him question everything he thought he knew about his own business. The abandoned facility was anything but deserted. Bright work lights illuminated a massive fenced compound containing rows upon rows of luxury vehicles. Marcus counted methodically, his business mind automatically calculating values even as his heart broke with each familiar car he recognized. There was Mrs. Patterson's Porsche, the one she'd been waiting 3 months for. The collector's edition Lamborghini that was supposed to go to the mayor's son. A vintage Aston Martin that Marcus had personally imported from London. But it wasn't just recent thefts. As Marcus adjusted his binoculars, he spotted vehicles that had been sold months ago. Cars that, according to his records, had been delivered to satisfied customers were sitting in this graveyard of his dreams, collecting rain and dust. The operation was bigger than theft. It was identity fraud on a massive scale. Someone wasn't just stealing cars. They were creating false sales records, phantom customers, and elaborate paper trails that made stolen inventory look like legitimate business transactions. Marcus watched as the newly arrived vehicles were unloaded and driven to specific sections of the lot. There was an organization to the chaos. Luxury sedans in one area, sports cars in another, SUVs and trucks in a third section. This wasn't random criminal activity. This was systematic liquidation. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. A man in an expensive overcoat was directing the placement of vehicles, pointing and gesturing with the authority of someone in charge. Even from this distance, even in the dim light, Marcus recognized the confident posture and broad shoulders. It was Thomas Rodriguez, his general manager, the man he'd hired personally 5 years ago, the man he trusted to run day-to-day operations while Marcus focused on expansion and growth. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Thomas wasn't just another employee. He was Marcus's right hand, the person who had access to everything: customer lists, financial records, shipping schedules, security protocols. If Thomas was involved, then this conspiracy had tentacles reaching into every aspect of Grant Luxury Motors. As Marcus watched, Thomas pulled out what appeared to be a tablet and began scanning barcodes on the newly arrived vehicles. Each scan was followed by some kind of digital entry, probably updating the status of stolen cars and whatever shadow database they were maintaining. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was corporate espionage conducted by his own management team. They hadn't just stolen cars, they'd stolen his entire business model, his customer relationships, his reputation. Marcus forced himself to document everything methodically, taking photos despite the rain and darkness. He counted over 70 vehicles in the lot, representing roughly $12 million in inventory that was supposed to be generating revenue for his company. But as devastating as the financial loss was, what hurt most was the human cost. Mrs. Patterson had been calling every week about her Porsche, and Marcus had personally assured her it was on the way. The mayor's son had paid in full and was planning to surprise his fiancée. These weren't just numbers on a balance sheet, they were real people who trusted Grant Luxury Motors. As the rain intensified, Marcus made a decision that would define everything that came next. He wasn't just going to recover his stolen inventory, he was going to destroy everyone involved in this betrayal. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of the operation. Where were these cars going next? Who was buying them? And most importantly, how high up did this conspiracy reach? Tomorrow night, he would find out. Because Marcus Grant had learned something important in building his empire. When someone steals from you, you don't just take back what's yours. You take everything they have. Tuesday night brought clear skies and a full moon that Marcus cursed silently as he positioned himself in the same hiding spot behind the container stack. The extra visibility made surveillance more dangerous, but he needed answers. 3 days of sleepless investigation as CEO had revealed financial irregularities going back 18 months, and tonight he was determined to discover where his stolen empire was ultimately heading. He'd spent Monday following paper trails that led nowhere, shipping manifests that disappeared from databases, customer records that existed only in fragments, bank transfers that vanished into offshore accounts. Someone had been very careful to cover their tracks, but Marcus hadn't built his business by accepting defeat when things got complicated. At 11:47 p.m., the warehouse came alive with activity unlike anything Marcus had witnessed before. Instead of the usual 2 transport trucks, a convoy of 6 vehicles approached the compound, 4 car carriers, a refrigerated truck, and a massive shipping container trailer that could have carried half his showroom. Marcus raised his binoculars and felt his heart stop. The container trailer bore the logo of Pacific International Shipping, a legitimate freight company he'd used himself for importing rare vehicles from Europe. But this wasn't a delivery, it was an exodus. Through the fence, Marcus watched as Thomas Rodriguez emerged from a temporary office trailer, clipboard in hand, directing operations like a seasoned logistics manager. But he wasn't alone. 3 other men in expensive suits stood beside him, and even from this distance, Marcus could see they weren't Americans. Their gestures, their posture, the way they examined each vehicle suggested they were foreign buyers conducting final inspections. The loading process was mesmerizing in its efficiency. Each car was driven onto the container trailer by someone wearing white cotton gloves, while Thomas checked off items on what appeared to be a detailed inventory list. These weren't stolen cars being hidden. They were premium merchandise being prepared for international export. Marcus focused his binoculars on the paperwork being exchanged and felt his world tilt sideways. The documents looked official, complete with stamps and customs seals. Someone wasn't just stealing cars and hiding them. They were using legitimate export channels to ship stolen American luxury vehicles to overseas markets. As the night progressed, Marcus began to understand the brilliant criminality of the operation. The cars weren't disappearing into some black market chop shop. They were being legally exported using authentic dealership transfer documents, probably destined for wealthy collectors in countries where American luxury vehicles commanded premium prices and questions about provenance were rarely asked. Around 2:30 a.m., Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized one of the foreign buyers. Through his binoculars, He could clearly see Viktor Kozlov, a Russian businessman he'd met at an automotive trade show in Las Vegas 2 years earlier. Kozlov had approached him then about becoming an official international distributor for Grant Luxury Motors, an offer Marcus had politely declined because he couldn't verify the man's credentials. Now Kozlov was here, personally inspecting stolen vehicles that would probably end up in Moscow or St. Petersburg showrooms, sold to oligarchs and crime bosses who paid premium prices for American luxury cars with no questions asked. But the most devastating revelation came when Marcus overheard a conversation between Thomas and Kozlov. The wind carried their voices clearly across the empty lot. "The next shipment needs to be bigger," Kozlov was saying in accented English. "My buyers in Moscow are asking for 50 vehicles minimum. They're willing to pay 30% above American retail for the right cars." Thomas nodded eagerly. "We can deliver that. Marcus Grant is expanding the dealership next month, new inventory arrivals every week. He has no idea we're operating a parallel export business using his own supply chain." Marcus gripped his binoculars so tightly his knuckles went white. They weren't just stealing from him. They were using his reputation, his business relationships, his carefully cultivated supplier network to build their criminal empire. Every expansion he planned, every new partnership he developed, was being exploited by the people he trusted most. The conversation continued, revealing details that made Marcus's stomach churn. The operation had been running for over 2 years, with shipments leaving monthly for Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Conservative estimates suggested they'd moved over 300 vehicles, generating roughly $40 million in revenue that should have belonged to Grant Luxury Motors. "And the documentation?" Kozlov asked. "Perfect," Thomas replied. "Jennifer handles all the paperwork. Every car leaves with legitimate export permits, insurance certificates, the works. As far as customs is concerned, these are authorized dealer transfers to international buyers." Jennifer Walsh. Another knife in Marcus's back. The woman who'd stood beside him at company parties, who'd helped him navigate regulatory requirements when he'd expanded into rare vehicle imports, who'd earned his complete trust over 8 years of exemplary service. As the container was sealed and prepared for transport, Marcus realized the full scope of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just theft, it was the systematic dismantling of everything he'd built, conducted by the very people he'd elevated to positions of trust and authority. The shipping container would probably be loaded onto a cargo ship within hours, carrying 25 vehicles worth over $4 million to buyers who would never know they were purchasing stolen merchandise. By the time the cars reached their destination, they'd have new identities, new registration papers, and new owners who believed they were buying premium American luxury vehicles through legitimate channels. Marcus watched the convoy disappear into the night, carrying with it not just stolen cars but stolen dreams, stolen trust, and stolen futures. As dawn approached, he sat in his Honda Civic, mind racing with plans for revenge that would be as systematic and thorough as the betrayal he'd uncovered. Tomorrow night, he would set a trap that would bring down the entire operation. Because Marcus Grant had learned something important about international business. When someone steals your reputation along with your inventory, you don't just recover what's yours. You destroy their entire network. Friday morning, Marcus Grant sat in his CO office, staring at the elaborate trap he'd spent 3 days constructing. On his desk lay forged shipping orders, fabricated customer requests, and a carefully crafted delivery schedule that would lure his betrayers into the perfect storm. Today, the hunter would become the prey. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Using his executive access, Marcus had created a fake, urgent international delivery, requiring immediate transport of 12 premium vehicles to a supposed buyer in Miami. The paperwork looked authentic because it was authentic, generated through the same systems Thomas and his crew had been exploiting for 2 years. But Marcus had added special ingredients to this particular meal. Hidden in the delivery manifest were 3 vehicles that didn't exist in his current inventory, cars that had been sold months ago but were actually sitting in the warehouse lot. Anyone attempting to fulfill this order would be forced to retrieve vehicles from their stolen stockpile, exposing the entire operation. Detective Sarah Chin, no relation to David Chen, thankfully, sat across from Marcus's desk, reviewing the evidence he'd compiled. As the head of the Commercial Crimes Unit, she'd seen elaborate fraud cases before, but nothing quite like this. "This is incredibly sophisticated," she said, flipping through photographs of the warehouse operation. "International export fraud, identity theft, customs document forgery. We're looking at federal charges that could put these people away for decades." Marcus nodded grimly. "I want them all, Detective. Not just the foot soldiers, but everyone involved. This conspiracy has destroyed relationships with customers I've served for years. The timing will be critical," Detective Chen explained. "We need to catch them in the act of loading stolen vehicles with fraudulent documentation. Once those cars are in international shipping containers, jurisdiction becomes complicated." Marcus had already thought of that. Using his access to the dealership's security system, he'd quietly upgraded the cameras around the rear loading area, installing high-definition night vision equipment that would capture every face, every license plate, every incriminating detail. More importantly, he'd gained administrative control over the digital recording system, ensuring that tonight's activities would be permanently documented. At 3 p.m., Marcus sent the fabricated urgent delivery request through official channels, marking it as CEO priority, immediate fulfillment required. The order specified that all 12 vehicles needed to be loaded and ready for transport by midnight, with shipping containers arriving at 1 a.m. for immediate departure to Miami. By 4 p.m., his phone was ringing. "Mr. Grant?" It was Jennifer Walsh, her voice tight with what sounded like panic. "I'm looking at this Miami delivery order, and I'm seeing some irregularities in the inventory numbers." Marcus smiled coldly. Of course she was seeing irregularities. 3 of the requested vehicles were currently sitting in her stolen car lot. "What kind of irregularities, Jennifer?" Marcus asked, playing the concerned CEO perfectly. "Well, sir, the Aston Martin DB11 listed here, our records show it was delivered to a customer in October. And the McLaren 720S was reported as damaged in transport and sent for extensive repairs." Both lies. Marcus had watched those exact vehicles being loaded into shipping containers just days before. "That's strange," Marcus replied. "Can you track down where those vehicles actually are? The Miami buyer is paying full retail plus shipping. We can't afford to disappoint them." There was a long pause. I'll look into it and get back to you." Marcus knew exactly what Jennifer would do next. She'd contact Thomas, who would contact David, who would realize they needed to retrieve specific vehicles from the warehouse to fulfill the fake order. The trap was closing. At 6 p.m., Marcus received a call from Thomas Rodriguez. "Marcus, we have a situation with tonight's Miami shipment. Some of the requested vehicles seem to be misplaced in our system. I'm going to need authorization to work through the night to locate and prepare them. Whatever it takes, Thomas. This customer represents a potential ongoing relationship worth millions. I'm counting on you to make this happen." "Understood. We'll have everything ready by midnight." As Marcus hung up, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Thomas had been like a younger brother to him, someone he mentored and trusted completely. Tonight, that relationship would end in handcuffs and federal charges. At 10 p.m., Marcus arrived for his night shift as security guard Marcus Johnson, but tonight was different. Detective Chun and her team were positioned strategically around the facility, and Marcus carried a small transmitter that would signal them when the operation began. The security office had been transformed into a command center. Multiple monitors showed feeds from the upgraded cameras, and Marcus had a direct radio link to the police units surrounding the property. Everything was ready. At 11:45 p.m., the familiar convoy of trucks approached the rear gate, but tonight they came prepared for a massive operation. 4 transport carriers, 2 shipping containers, and a coordination vehicle that Marcus recognized as Thomas's personal BMW. Through his camera monitors, Marcus watched as his trusted employees began the most elaborate theft operation he'd yet witnessed. David Chin directed the loading with military precision, while Jennifer Walsh handled documentation that would make the stolen vehicles disappear forever into international shipping channels. But tonight, Thomas Rodriguez was present to personally oversee the operation, and Marcus could see him checking items off a list that exactly matched the fabricated Miami delivery order. They were stealing cars to fulfill a fake order created by the very man they were robbing. As the first stolen vehicle was loaded onto the transport truck, Marcus keyed his radio transmitter. Across the facility, Detective Chen and her team began moving into position. Tonight, the systematic destruction of Marcus Grant's empire would finally come to an end. But more importantly, tonight would mark the beginning of justice for every customer who trusted Grant Luxury Motors and been betrayed. The trap was sprung, and there would be no escape. At 2:17 a.m., as Thomas Rodriguez personally supervised the loading of the last stolen vehicle onto the transport truck, Marcus keyed his radio one final time. "All units go." "Repeat, all units go." The night exploded into chaos. Floodlights blazed from every direction as police units surrounded the facility. Detective Chen's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Police! Nobody move! This facility is surrounded!" Marcus watched through his security monitors as his betrayers scrambled in panic. David Chen dropped his clipboard and ran toward the fence, only to find officers waiting. Jennifer Walsh attempted to shred documents, but federal agents were already moving to secure all evidence. Thomas Rodriguez stood frozen beside the transport truck, his face a mask of disbelief as armed officers approached with weapons drawn. Through the camera feed, Marcus could see his former general manager's lips moving in what appeared to be prayers or curses. Within 20 minutes, the operation was completely shut down. Handcuffs clicked, rights were read, and the systematic theft network that had plagued Grant Luxury Motors for 2 years was finally dismantled. But Marcus Grant wasn't finished. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, Marcus walked through the front doors of his dealership wearing his finest charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, and the confident bearing of a man who had just reclaimed his empire. The morning shift employees looked up from their coffee and newspapers, expecting to see their familiar CEO beginning another routine day. They had no idea their world was about to change forever. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the showroom floor, "please gather in the main conference room immediately. We have some important business to discuss." As employees filed into the conference room, salespeople, mechanics, administrative staff, Marcus noticed the nervous glances being exchanged. Word of the overnight arrests hadn't reached everyone yet, but the absence of Thomas, Jennifer, and David was clearly causing concern. Marcus stood at the head of the conference table, looking at faces he'd known for years. Some of these people were innocent victims of the conspiracy. Others, well, he was about to find out. "Last night," Marcus began, his voice steady and cold, "federal agents arrested several members of our management team for operating an international car theft ring. Over the past 2 years, they systematically stole nearly 400 vehicles from this dealership, generating over $50 million in criminal profits." Gasps echoed around the room. Several employees looked genuinely shocked, but Marcus was watching for different reactions, the faces that showed fear rather than surprise. "Thomas Rodriguez, Jennifer Walsh, and David Chen are currently in federal custody, facing charges that will likely result in decades in prison. But their operation was too sophisticated to run without additional help." Marcus pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "You see, I spent the last 2 weeks working nights as a security guard in my own dealership. Some of you know me as Marcus Johnson, the new night shift guard who needed extra money." The color drained from several faces around the table. Craig Wilson, the nervous night supervisor, began visibly sweating. Sandra Martinez from accounting suddenly found her hands very interesting. "During those 2 weeks, I documented everything. Every conversation, every suspicious activity, every person who knew more than they should have about vehicles that were supposedly missing." Marcus opened the folder and began reading names. "Craig Wilson, you've been providing shift schedules to the theft ring, ensuring they knew when genuine security guards wouldn't be present. Sandra Martinez, you've been creating false customer accounts to provide paper trails for stolen vehicles. Robert Kim, you've been altering service records to make stolen cars appear as if they were undergoing repairs. One by one, Marcus called out the co-conspirators, watching as their faces crumbled with the realization that their CEO had personally witnessed their crimes. Each name was followed by the same statement. You're fired, and Detective Chen will be speaking with you shortly. But Marcus wasn't done. He pulled out a second folder, this one containing customer information. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus said, looking directly at his sales manager, has been calling every week about her Porsche. The same Porsche that I watched being loaded onto a shipping container bound for Moscow. Mayor Wilson's son paid full price for a BMW that's currently sitting in a warehouse, waiting to be sold to Russian oligarchs. Marcus's voice grew stronger, fueled by righteous anger. Every customer who trusted us, every person who chose Grant Luxury Motors because of our reputation, they were betrayed by people sitting in this room. The remaining employees, those who were innocent, looked around in horror as they realized the scope of the conspiracy that had been operating under their noses. Effective immediately, Marcus continued. Grant Luxury Motors is implementing new security protocols, new inventory management systems, and new personnel policies. Everyone who participated in this theft ring is terminated and will face criminal charges. Everyone who remained loyal to this company and our customers will receive a $5,000 bonus and my personal gratitude. As federal agents entered the conference room to escort the co-conspirators away, Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He built this business from nothing, trusting people who ultimately betrayed that trust for money. But Grant Luxury Motors would survive. Within hours, Marcus was on the phone with insurance companies, law enforcement agencies, and most importantly, with customers like Mrs. Patterson, personally explaining what had happened and how he would make it right. The stolen vehicles would be recovered. The customers would be compensated. The reputation of Grant Luxury Motors would be rebuilt on a foundation of transparency and accountability. As the last of the conspirators was led away in handcuffs, Marcus stood in his showroom, looking at the cars that remained, the honest inventory that belonged where it was supposed to be. Marcus Grant had learned the hardest lesson of his business career. Success isn't just about building something great, it's about protecting it from the people who would destroy it from within. But he'd also learned something else. When you fight for what's right, when you refuse to let criminals steal your dreams, justice has a way of prevailing. The empire was secure. The betrayers were gone. And Grant Luxury Motors would be stronger than ever.